someone whom you loved?" asked the spirit. "I never loved anyone in that way," she said rather sadly. "Nor was I thinking of any one person when I spoke, but of 2 or 3 who, by touching for an instant upon a certain chord of my being, had called forth a single note of that strange melody which seemed sleeping in my soul. It has seldom happened, however, that I have owed such feelings to people, and no one ever gave me a moment of such happiness as it was my lot to feel one evening in the church of Or San Michele in Florence." "Tell me about it," said the spirit. "It was near sunset on a rainy spring afternoon in Easter week. The clouds had vanished, dispersed by a sudden wind, and as we entered the church the fiery panes of the high window shone out like lamps through the dusk. A priest was at the high altar, his white cope a livid spot in the incense-laden obscurity, the light of the candles flickering up and down like fireflies about his head. A few people knelt nearby. We stole behind them, and sat down on a bench close to the tabernacle of Orcagna. Strange to say, though Florence was not new to me, I had never been in the church before, and in that magical light I saw for the first time the inlaid steps, the fluted columns, the sculptured bas-reliefs and canopy of the marvelous shrine. The marble, worn and mellowed by the subtle hand of time, took on an unspeakable rosy hue, suggestive in some remote way of the honey-colored columns of the Parthenon, but more mystic, more complex, a color not born of the sun's inveterate kiss, but made up of cryptal twilight, and the flame of candles upon martyrs' tombs, and gleams of sunset through symbolic panes of chrysoprase and ruby, such a light as illumes the missals in the library of Siena, or burns like a hidden fire through the Madonna of Gian Bellini in the Church of the Redeemer at Venice. The light of the Middle Ages, richer, more solemn, more significant than the limpid sunshine of Greece. The church was silent but for the wail of the priest and the occasional scraping of a chair against the floor, and as I sat there, bathed in that light, absorbed in rapt contemplation of the marble miracle which rose before me, cunningly wrought as a casket of ivory and enriched with jewel-like incrustations and tarnished gleams of gold, I felt myself borne onward along a mighty current, whose source seemed to be in the very beginning of things, and whose tremendous waters gathered as they went all the mingled streams of human passion and endeavor. Life in all its varied manifestations of beauty and strangeness seemed weaving a rhythmical dance around me as I moved, and wherever the spirit of man had passed, I knew that my foot had once been familiar. As I gazed, the medieval bosses of the tabernacle of Orcagna seemed to melt and flow into their primal forms, so that the folded lotus of the Nile and the Greek acanthus were braided with the runic knots and fish-tailed monsters of the north, and all the plastic terror and beauty born of man's hand, from the Ganges to the Baltic, quivered and mingled in Orcagna's apotheosis of Mary. And so the river bore me on, past the alien face of antique civilizations and the familiar wonders of Greece, till I swam upon the fiercely rushing tide of the Middle Ages, with its swirling eddies of passion, its heaven-reflecting pools of poetry and art. I heard the rhythmic blow of the craftsmen' hammers in the goldsmiths' workshops, and on the walls of churches the party cries of armed factions in the narrow streets, the organ roll of Dante's verse, the crackle of the faggots around the Arnold of Brescia, the twitter of the swallows to which St. Francis preached, the laughter of the ladies listening on the hillside to the quips of the Decameron, while plague-struck Florence howled beneath them. All this and much more I heard, joined in strange unison with voices earlier and more remote, fierce, passionate, or tender, yet subdued to such awful harmony that I thought of the song that the morning stars sang together and felt as though it were sounding in my ears. My heart beat to suffocation. The years burned my lids. The joy, the mystery of it seemed too intolerable to be borne. I could not understand even then the words of the song, but I knew that if there had been someone at my side who could have heard it with me, we might have found the key to it together. I turned to my husband, who was sitting beside me in an attitude of patient dejection, gazing into the bottom of his hat. But at that moment he rose, and stretching his stiffened legs, said mildly, "Hadn't we better be going? There doesn't seem to be much to see here, and you know the table d'hôte dinner is at 6:30. Her recital ended. There was an interval of silence. Then the Spirit of Life said, "There is a compensation in store for such needs as you have expressed." "Oh, then you do understand," she exclaimed. "Tell me what compensation, I entreat you." "It is ordained," the Spirit answered, "that every soul which seeks in vain on earth for a kindred soul to whom it can lay bare its inmost being, shall find that soul here and be united to it for eternity." A glad cry broke from her lips. "Ah, shall I find him at last?" she cried, exultant. "He is here," said the Spirit of Life. She looked up and saw that a man stood near whose soul, for in that unwonted light she seemed to see his soul more clearly than his face, drew her toward him with an invincible force. "Are you really he?" she murmured. "I am he," he answered. She laid her hand in his and drew him toward the parapet which overhung the valley. "Shall we go down together?" she asked him. "Into that marvelous country? Shall we see it together, as if with the self-same eyes, and tell each other in the same words all that we think and feel?" "So," he replied, "have I hoped and dreamed." "What?" she asked with rising joy. "Then you too have looked for me?" "All my life." "How wonderful! And did you never find anyone in the other world who understood you?" "Not wholly. Not as you and I understand each other." "Then you feel it too?" "Oh, I am happy," she sighed. They stood hand in hand, looking down over the parapet upon the shimmering landscape, which stretched forth beneath them into saffron space. And the Spirit of Life, who kept watch near the threshold, heard now and then a floating fragment of their talk blown backward like the stray swallows which the wind sometimes separates from their migratory tribe. "Did you never feel at sunset?" "Ah, yes. But I never heard anyone else say so, did you?" "Do you remember that line in the third canto of the Inferno?" "Ah, that line, my favorite always. Is it possible you know the stooping Victory in the frieze of the Nikeapterus?" "You mean the one who is tying her sandal? Then you have noticed, too, that all Botticelli and Mantinea are dormant in those flying folds of her drapery." "After a storm in autumn, have you never seen—" "Yes. It is curious how certain flowers suggest certain painters. The perfume of the Incarnation, Leonardo, that of the rose, Titian, the tuberose, Crivelli. I never supposed that anyone else had noticed it." "Have you never thought—" "Oh, yes, often and often, but I never dreamed that anyone else had." "But surely you must have felt—" "Oh, yes, yes. And you too? How beautiful, how strange,